Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reportedly told members of his coalition government that he will pause the controversial judicial overhaul. An announcement was expected earlier, but that has been delayed. Tensions peaked on Sunday when the Prime Minister fired the Defense Minister for speaking out against the changes. The dismissal triggered major demonstrations which have continued today. Currently, thousands of people have gathered outside the parliament in West Jerusalem. Israel's main labor union has called a nationwide strike.
What happened last night was the people, us, telling Netanyahu that this can't go on, this has to stop, this has to, something gotta go. And what happens here right now is us, again the people, trying to tell the unions that they have to join us.
From here we're going on a general strike. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is fired, dismissed like this? What are we, a banana republic? What is this?
Well, John Cookson joins us now from London, where he's monitoring developments. Hello, John, and welcome to Newsday. It's always great to have you. Now, let's get straight into it. Prime Minister Netanyahu was due to make a statement this morning, but it was postponed. What do you think is going on behind the scenes?
Hi, great to be on Newsday. Benjamin Netanyahu holed up taking political soundings at this hour, deciding what to do next. As you say, he was due to make a statement this morning at around 10 a.m. London and Lagos time, but that was postponed. He has, in fact, tweeted or retweeted a statement about 10 minutes ago, calling on demonstrators to behave responsibly and refrain from violence. So that's the only thing that we've heard.
Now we're seeing large crowds just looking at that, the live video. Now, faced with this mass protest, will he bow to pressure and scrap the judicial reform legislation?
I think so. I think what will be announced later today is some kind of freeze on the proposals because right-wing coalition partners and the coalition partnership that he leads are threatening to break the coalition if he doesn't. And yet, on the other hand, you have 200,000 Israelis on the streets at some point, and this is unprecedented, and he will face up to the reality of that. So I think he will bow to pressure in due course and probably come sometime today because he simply has to. And he's, one of the most astute politicians in the world is Benjamin Netanyahu. I've interviewed him a few times since he became Prime Minister back in the early 1990s, and he is, as I say, a very clever, astute politician, although some will say a corrupt politician, and we'll wait to find out where those corruption charges and allegations go in due course. Yes, I think he will bow to pressure and put a freeze on the proposed legislation, which everyone on the streets is saying is an absolute affront to democracy, giving the Israeli parliament a chance to overrule the Supreme Court with a simple majority, and this is just not acceptable to many thousands of Israelis who've been making their thoughts known.
Right. And John, of course, earlier you did allude to the fact that it's most likely that he will bow to the pressure. But on the long term, I know you've already said, we're not sure what will happen. But what are the prospects for a prime minister facing corruption charges? Because bowing to this pressure almost seems as though he's setting himself up for the end of his reign.
You might see it that way, but he's been kicking around the block now for some 30-odd years and surviving all sorts of scandals over the years. In many quarters and amongst politicians in Jerusalem, he's a popular man. When you meet him face to face, he's very affable, very agreeable, and a pleasant sort of character, even though you might not agree with some of his right-wing view. So he has this aura about him, this kind of charisma, which seems to get him by, and he can wriggle his way out of all sorts of bad situations. The corruption charges that he faces are serious and involve hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's alleged that he accepted bribes and gifts, such as gold watches and fur coats for his wife and cigars and champagne, in return for political favors or interrupting a judicial process against one particular company. Now, in the great scheme of things in the Middle East, these are not, they're serious charges, but they're not the most serious charges any leader or world leader could face. So I think, given Netanyahu's track record, that he might just find a way through all this legal morass. He was investigation began in 2016, and he was indicted in 2019, and the case actually started back in May 2020. So it's been going on for a little while already. And it's barely halfway through at the moment. But to give you my honest opinion, I think he will somehow survive all of this, given his track record.
Definitely. And, we're looking at, Israeli universities, workers' unions, and, of course, even the airports grounding flights. But what role does America have to play in finding a solution to the current crisis in Israel, John?
Absolutely huge. I imagine Netanyahu's waiting for the White House to wake up this morning and take some serious instruction from the Biden administration as to what to do. The airport Ben Gurion has actually reopened a short time ago, but the ports are shut. And even stores across Israel are closed or will close tomorrow. McDonald's is shut down completely across Israel. I mean, this is serious stuff. But the Americans are Israel's closest ally in the world. America gives $4 billion in military aid to Israel every year. And Israel is important to America. Not only strategically in terms of foreign policy, but also as far as the election cycle is going. And we're less than 2 years now from a presidential election. The Biden administration wouldn't want to upset too much the Jewish lobby in America. So you have all these factors going on, but this closeness between Washington and Jerusalem is absolutely watertight at the moment. Politically, Netanyahu and Biden are not cut from the same political cloth, but certainly as far as geopolitics are concerned, they are united at the hip at the moment. So Netanyahu will be sounding Washington out and getting their views on what to do. As I say, I think Washington will advise probably for this proposed legislation to be frozen, and that's what Netanyahu will do in due course.
Right, and still on Netanyahu's international relations, of course, we saw the diplomatic offensive last week with the European leaders, and we spoke to you, and we knew the focus of that was largely on Iran. But do you think any insight into the impasse in Israel at all would have been shared by somebody like Rishi Sunak?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've talked about the closeness of the US and Israel, but certainly the UK is arguably Israel's second biggest ally. And interestingly, what's going on at the moment would probably draw condemnation from other governments. The UK is surprisingly quiet on what's going on, but they'll certainly I'm sure be giving Netanyahu the same advice that it has to be settled somehow, because Israel is too important an ally to be embroiled in this kind of mass protest, and which could, in theory, lead to a toppling of Netanyahu's government, which in the Middle East would be a very dangerous thing to happen at this present time.
Thank you so much, John. But we're just going to pause here and go quickly to the report that you've put together regarding this issue, and come back and ask you one question before we leave.
Scenes like these are unprecedented in Israel. Tens of thousands poured into the streets of cities across the country in a spontaneous outburst of anger after Prime Minister Netanyahu abruptly sacked his defense minister for challenging the Israeli leader's plans to overhaul the judiciary. Early this morning, police scuffled with protesters who'd gathered outside Netanyahu's private home in Jerusalem.
We went to the Prime Minister's residence, and afterwards we got dispersed by the water spray. I got sprayed into my face directly, and then we just went here, like all of us. It was never as big as it was today.
This is a new form of regime, what they call a procedural democracy or a hollow democracy, and these sort of things never last. It's the same thing that we had in Russia. It's the same we see in Venezuela. It's governments that will eventually, no matter what, deteriorate into a autocracy.
הדרך הטובה ביותר.
Netanyahu leads Israel's most right-wing government. He wants full control over the committee, which appoints judges. He says the changes will stop the courts overreaching their powers as he faces an ongoing trial for corruption. Opposition leaders are insisting plans to overhaul the judicial system be scrapped. Ona Barbive of the Atid party said, "Get rid of it for the future of all Israeli citizens." Faced with a general strike and continuing mass protests, Netanyahu's coalition government has never looked more vulnerable. John Cookson, Arise News.
Incredible report as always, John. And, you know, in the report, there's a gentleman who referred to, who compared Israel to Venezuela, to Russia, to nations such as that. And of course, we are seeing mass uprisings, youth-driven uprisings all over the world, especially. Do you think Benjamin Netanyahu can actually overcome this? I know earlier you did say that he's in terms of strategy, he gets it. But is this one that he can overcome when the masses are so heavily invested in it?
Yeah, look, as I said earlier, we've not seen protests like this in Israel ever. You know, so that has to be said right at the top. And as I say, I don't know him personally, but I've met him as a journalist on a number of occasions. And he likes to project himself on the world stage as this, leader of the Middle East, only true democracy, a regular guy, an honest broker, a decent politician, and to be compared to Putin and Erdogan of Turkey, and also, you know, republics like Venezuela, it will hurt him a lot. He'll take that personally. I can tell you, because and this is what the demonstrators are calling him now, another Erdogan, who is arguably uses dictator tactics in Turkey, which is not a million miles from Israel. So, as I say, he'll be very upset about that, and he will take those allegations very seriously. Yes, we are seeing people power on the streets in Israel, but you know, it's early days, and if Netanyahu does back down and put a freeze, then the demonstrations that were been ongoing now for months will subside. But long term, we'll have to wait and see how things work out in Israel. But we're not in revolution territory just yet.
All right, Chief Correspondent John Cookson joining us from London. Thank you so much for being here on Newsday.